Gonzaga takes on USC in a charity exhibition on Saturday, but don't expect to see any familiar faces for the Trojans from last year's team.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to provide news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, it is the final episode before the first game of the season for Gonzaga. Yes, it's not a real game in the sense that it's not going into the record books, but Gonzaga will face an opponent that is not Gonzaga on Saturday. They are taking on USC. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about how to watch the game, where it is, all that good stuff. We're also going to talk about this USC team, brand new roster, brand new coach, brand new everything, although there are some familiar faces on this roster, some players Gonzaga has faced or recruited in the past. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about our 5, I don't want to say keys to victory. They're really just questions. 5 questions we want answered from this scrimmage game. Things we're going to be looking for, lineups, specific ways certain players are utilized, things of that nature. We're going to close out the show with a sad update around of a coach situation around the league. And then we're also going to talk about a played interview from Randy Bennett, a 3-minute clip from a conversation myself and Zach Farmer from the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast had with Coach Bennett at WCC Media Day, his thoughts on Washington State and Oregon State joining the WCC, as well as his approach to non-conference scheduling. We start the show, Gonzaga's charity exhibition, USC Trojans, Saturday, October 26th, 5 p.m. Pacific time at the Acrisure Arena in Palm Desert, California. The main question I know a lot of folks are going to have is how to watch this game. It is available on Big Plus for $6.99 on pay-per-view. It is a pay-per-view event. You have to buy in order to watch it. There is no other way. You can try to find not legal streams, but I don't think you're going to have a lot of success with that. The link to buy the event for $7 is on the Gonzaga website. I would just check there. That's the easiest way to find it. Buy it, $7. And guess what? Folks, your money goes to charity. This is a charity exhibition after all. As I've said before, I'll explain it again. Basically, the way that it works is all college basketball teams get 2 of the following. You can get 2 exhibition games, or you can do a secret scrimmage, or you can do a game against a non-Division I opponent. 2 of those things is effectively what you're allowed. That's a simplification, but that's the easiest way to explain it. Gonzaga has got a charity exhibition against USC. That's the game coming up on Saturday. And then they play a regular exhibition game against Warner Pacific next Wednesday, October 30th. Those will be their 2 exhibition events. That's why you don't see somebody like Eastern Oregon on the schedule this year as a non-D1 opponent. But the charity exhibition part of this is I think, critical. It's hopefully will get more people to be willing to buy said event because your money goes to the Eisenhower Health Cardiovascular Institute, which is a research facility looking into cardiovascular health, as you probably guessed, in the Coachella area in California. USC has had a couple of players have significant cardiovascular issues the last couple of seasons. Of course, Bronny James last year, prior to his freshman season at USC, had that cardiovascular episode. The year previously, almost exactly the same time, Vincent Iwuchukwu, a big man for the Trojans, who was transferred to, I believe, St. John's this offseason, he also suffered a cardiovascular incident. So it's something near and dear to the USC basketball program, I can imagine. Cool for Gonzaga, cool for USC to get a chance to play this game and to raise money for a very important institution in California. So cool to see that. Again, link on the Gonzaga website. That's the fastest, quickest, easiest way to make sure you get a chance to watch this game at 5 p.m. on Saturday Pacific time. All right, let's talk a little bit about this USC team. Again, Gonzaga played them last year, played them in Vegas, beat them pretty good, but it's none of the same people. Coach Andy Enfield, who was there last year, led them to a 15-18 record. They were 8-12 in the final season of the Pac-12. It was not a good year, especially considering this is a team that had hype as a preseason top 25 team. They had the number 1 recruit in that entire class in Isaiah Collier. They had Bronny James, who, did not perform even at the expectation that he had, but was not considered like a top 10 prospect in the class or anything. But combined with the cardiovascular issue, he missed part of the season. But between him and Collier and Kobe Johnson and Joshua Morgan and DJ Rodman, this team was supposed to be really good last year, and they fell flat on their face. And while Coach Enfield did not get dismissed, he left to go coach at SMU in Dallas as they move into the ACC. And I don't know if he was going to get fired if he didn't leave, but it sort of felt like that kind of like, hey, maybe this is just a mutual, you get out before we have to actually fire you, and then we can hire somebody else. Incidentally, I kind of think Eric Musselman did the same thing, leaving Arkansas before he ended up getting canned over there. John Calipari was probably on his way out at Kentucky before he went to Arkansas. So that whole coaching carousel was kind of had a lot of situations similar to that. But Eric Musselman comes over from Arkansas to USC. He brings with him a whole new roster. And outside of that, we're already talking about all these changes for USC. They not only have a new coach, they not only have an entirely new roster, they're in a new conference. The Pac-12 is ceased to exist for the next couple of years on the basketball side. Of course, it'll be brought back 2 years from now with Gonzaga in that mix. But USC is in the Big Ten alongside Oregon, UCLA, and Washington. 4 of those schools from the Pac-12 going to the Big Ten. USC was projected 14th out of 18 in the Big Ten this year. So even with a new roster and a new coach, there's not a lot of optimism for this team at this point. They have played one game so far. It was an exhibition against Texas San Antonio on October 15th. They won by 21 points, 84-63 in that one. Looking ahead to this roster, like I said, not going to see any familiar faces from last year's USC team, but there are some players that are going to be familiar. Matt Knowling played at Yale last year. For those of you who remember, Gonzaga's first game of the season came against Yale on November 10th last year. Gonzaga won that one. Yale played a second time in Spokane in the NCAA tournament and knocked off a 4 seed in Auburn. A big part of that win, a big part of the game against Gonzaga, a big part of their entire season was Matt Knowling, their shooting guard. He was probably their best player last year, averaged about 12 and 5. He is now at USC. Kevin Patton Jr. played at San Diego last year. Steve Lavin recruited him. Steve Lavin did a very good job of bringing in high-profile and talented freshmen to his roster last year. But unfortunately, in the modern era, you land freshmen who are very good and you don't have the NIL money to keep them around. They don't stick around. That's what happened to the San Diego team. Kevin Patton Jr. now at USC. He averaged about 10 points, 4.5 boards, and 1.3 steals and blocks per game last year. He's one of the best freshmen in the entire conference. Last season, he's a tremendous defensive player. I think he is a very underrated addition for this USC team. I suspect most people who are previewing this team, who are discussing this team, are not expecting much from him. He's not somebody that's really moving the needle in a major way, and yet I think he's a very underrated addition for this team. Eric Musselman's teams have had some good defensive players in the past, and I think having a 6'8" versatile young wing like him who can block shots, generate steals, and score around the rim is going to be valuable. Even if he doesn't have a big role this year, I think he's going to be a big part of that team in the future. Wesley Yates has yet to play a college basketball game. He was a freshman, when he was a prospect out of high school. He was recruited by Gonzaga. He was recruited by a handful of other places. He ended up committing to Washington out of high school. He's from Beaumont, Texas. The reason that he came out to the Pacific Northwest to go to Washington was because his cousin, Quincy Pondexter, was an assistant coach at UW last year. Yates went to UW, but unfortunately suffered a foot injury and was unable to see the floor for his freshman season. After the season, the UW coaching staff got let go. Mostly head coach Mike Hopkins got let go, but usually that involves an entire coaching change. Wesley Yates hit the transfer portal after the season, ends up heading down south to go play at USC. So we'll get potentially get a look at him here, one of the first looks of him as a college basketball player, and a player who, again, was recruited by Gonzaga, so a familiar face there. Some of the other names for this USC team to keep an eye on: St. Thomas, transfer from Northern Colorado, averaged about 20 points per game last year. At this point, if you are a transfer from Northern Colorado who averaged 20 points per game, you're going to get attention, because the last transfer from Northern Colorado to do that was Dalton Connect, who went to Tennessee, was an All-American, was a first-round pick in the NBA draft, and after his first NBA game, looks like he may have fallen a little too far, going 17th to the Los Angeles Lakers. Does that mean St. Thomas is going to have the same level of success? Not sure. He scored 21 points in 20 minutes in their exhibition game against San Antonio, but UT San Antonio is not a very good school, not a very good team, I should say. But he's a name to keep an eye on. He's considered probably the best or second best player on this roster, and wouldn't surprise me at all if he leads their team in scoring in this exhibition game as well as throughout the season. The other option there in terms of potentially leading this team in scoring is Desmond Claude. Desmond Claude is a junior from Xavier. He played last year for Sean Miller's team, was kind of a breakout star for the Musketeers, averaged 16.5 points per game, which in the Big East is very difficult to do. Really nice haul for Coach Musselman to land Claude in the transfer portal, along with many of these other players here. He's another guy that I think is going to do a lot of scoring for this USC program. A couple other names, Chibuzo Agbo from Boise State. Leon Rice's team averaged just under 14 points per game for the Broncos. And then Josh Cohen, their starting center, projected starting center for USC, was the starting center at UMass last year in the A-10, averaged just about 16 points per game. So tons of new faces for USC, lots of questions about what this Trojans team is going to look like. But what I want to do now is talk about what we're looking at from a Gonzaga side. What are we looking for? What are the lineups going to be? What are some specific things that might show up in this game? We're going to talk about all that. But first, let's talk about Prize Picks, the place that has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everybody. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. So run your game all season long on Prize Picks. I love how simple this concept is. It takes away any concern over complicated strategies, especially in daily fantasy sports. You don't want it to be complicated. I also really appreciate that Prize Picks has an injury insurance policy. Nothing's worse than picking somebody and they go down on the second play of the game, and I'm always afraid that that's going to happen to me. But with Prize Picks, your lineup stay in play even if one of your players gets hurt. I also like checking in on their weekly promos. They have a Taco Tuesday deal when Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide you with even more value. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCollege to get on the Prize Picks app to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are still getting you ready for Gonzaga's charity exhibition matchup against the USC Trojans on Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Again, link for the game will be on the Gonzaga website. I'm sure they'll post it on social media as well. Pay-per-view, $6.99 to watch the game. The proceeds go to the Eisenhower Health Cardiovascular Institute in California. So it is for a good cause. It's $7. You get to see the Zags for the first time all year long. What is not to love about that? What I want to do now, for those of you who are longtime listeners to the show, everyday listeners, I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for continuing to make this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. You may recall that during the season, the last couple of years, whenever we're previewing a game, we typically preview the opponent, and then we do our 5 it's either keys to victory, 5 things to watch. We kind of change it, alter it slightly based on the opponent. In this situation, normally would be a 5 keys to victory. Here's what we need to see Gonzaga do in order to win. But if it's Gonzaga playing San Diego or Pacific or Warner Pacific in the case of next week, it's not necessarily the focus. The focus is more of like, what do we want to see? What kind of lineups do we want to see? Do we want to see more from the walk-ons, more from the bench players, things of that nature? In this case, since it's the first time we're seeing this team play a new opponent, and since the actual result doesn't really matter, it's a different situation. So these are basically just 5 questions I have that I'm going to be looking for answers to during this contest. Number 1, how do the minutes shake out / who starts? And the grain of salt here is that we're not necessarily sure how much Mark Few and Eric Musselman, for that matter, are going to give away. Now, the 2 teams are in incredibly different spots. Eric Musselman can just throw stuff at a wall. Try a starting lineup that maybe you didn't plan to use in the regular season and see what happens. You got a bunch of new players. They're all not really familiar playing with each other. I think that gives you a little bit more freedom to just try things. Obviously, Mark Few and Gonzaga have that freedom as well, but it's not like they need to try to shield anything. Like, we don't need to hide from Scott Drew at Baylor or Bobby Hurley at Arizona State or any of the other early opponents that Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike are going to start. Like that, everybody knows that. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to be a secret or a surprise here. So while I do think there is a little bit of mystery about who Gonzaga's fifth starter is going to be, we know Graham Ike is starting. We know Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman are starting. We feel pretty darn confident that either Ben Gregg or Michael Ajayi, or really that both those guys are starting is what I'm thinking. There's some thought maybe Khalif Battle is one of those starters, but I'll say whatever Gonzaga does, whether it's the projected starting lineup that I have, which is Gregg and Ajayi, whether it's Battle starting, whether they do something wonky like Dusty Stromer starting in a different spot, I don't necessarily think the starting lineup we see in this is going to be the starting lineup we see in the regular season, but it probably will be. Mark Few doesn't typically mess around with stuff like that unless he has to. Obviously, we saw a change last year. So I think whatever starting lineup we see is probably what they're going to roll out in the regular season, but again, it's not necessarily set in stone. More so, I'm curious about some of the specific lineups that we run. Do we see small ball lineups with like Ben Gregg at the 5 and Ajayi at the 4 and then 3 guards on the floor? Do we see jumbo lineups where Ike and Huff play together and Ben plays the 3? Do we see, how is Khalif Battle used? Is he always used alongside 2 other guards? Do we see lineups where Khalif Battle plays the 2? How is Dusty Stromer utilized similarly? How much is Smiley Diani and Emmanuel Innocente and Junsuke O play? They should play a decent amount because this is not a game that counts in the standings, and I think you'd want to see how those guys look in this kind of situation. I'm curious if Braden Smith plays. I think it's very unlikely that he plays because there's not really any reason to run him with this group when he's not going to play with most of these guys next year, but it's not going to count against him from a redshirt perspective if he were to play, so they could play him. Those are just some of the questions I have. Again, I think we'll see a fair amount of different lineups. I think we'll see a fair amount of the bench players, things that probably won't happen in the regular season, but that we'll get a chance to see in this setting. Question number 2, how do the Zags utilize Khalif Battle? I touched on that a little bit in that first one there, but does he play in the backcourt with one of Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman? How much does he play with both those guys where he's playing the 3 and those 2 guys are both in the backcourt? Does he play alongside Dusty Stromer? Does he play alongside Michael Ajayi playing the small ball 4? So not just lineup stuff though, like how is he utilized? Do they give him isolation opportunities to try to get to the cup? Does he just attack off of the dribble handoffs? Does he attack off of the motion offense? Like how are they using him to get, we know his strength is getting downhill, getting to the basket, finishing through contact and or getting to the free throw line. But how does Gonzaga specifically open up the offense to allow him to do that? There's also the extra caveat that Eric Musselman coached him last year. I don't know how much that's going to play into this in terms of whether Musselman will have a better idea of how to defend Khalif Battle, whether Battle will have a little extra juice going into the game. And again, it's an exhibition game, so there's also that kind of element of, not that you're not playing to win, but that you might be trying some different things from a coaching staff or even just Battle himself. So that'll be something to watch there. Key number 3, how do Huff and Stromer look after a full offseason? Mark Few mentioned this at WCC Media Days. He said both guys are stronger. Both guys have been in the weight room. We knew that needed to happen. But the question becomes, does that functional strength translate into game action? Do these guys look stronger on the court? Not just physically, not just are their muscles bigger, but does it look like they're playing stronger? And again, a 1-game sample size, you're not going to learn everything, but it'll be nice to get a sense of that. How about confidence? Dusty Stromer got a lot more confident as the year went on. Braden Huff started the season very confident, and it kind of ebbed and flowed as the season went on. I'm very curious to see how they look in this game. Is Dusty Stromer more confident pump faking and driving to the rim, driving and dishing, facilitating more than he did last year? Is Braden Huff more confident pumping threes? How does he look as a rim protector? Those are some of the stuff I'm going to be looking for with those 2 sophomores in particular. Number 4, what is Ben Gregg's role? Again, it's kind of similar to what we talked about with Khalif Battle, but does Ben exclusively play the 4? Last year, he kind of had to play some 3 because they played those 3 big lineups with Watson, Gregg, and Ike on the floor. But this year, with Michael Ajayi kind of replacing Watson and Ajayi being more of a traditional 3 than I think Watson was, does that mean Ben is more limited to just playing the 4? How often is he defending away from the rim? Or is Gonzaga asking him more to play defense around the rim because he's strong and Gonzaga doesn't have a lot of rim protection? I'm curious how they deploy him defensively, and that'll change matchup by matchup. So I'm not sure how much of an answer we'll get in that area, but I am curious just kind of what his usage looks like defensively and offensively as well, although I think we have a a bit of a better sense of what that's going to look like, just having seen him for the last 4 years. And then, of course, number 5, do we see any of the walk-ons? I hope so. I hope we get to see guys like Braden Lemke and Noah Holland and Cade Ornest, the 3 new walk-ons on the roster. I'd like to see them get some run. Joe Few, sure. I mean, it'd be nice to see him get some run too. It just doesn't really matter as much. He's already played. He's already done it before. Those 3 guys are all new to the Division I level. Ornest and Lemke are both true freshmen. Holland played at the junior college level. Holland's family, both his parents went to Gonzaga, both played at sports at Gonzaga. Ornest is from the Kitsap County area and Seattle area. Lemke is from Las Vegas, 6'11", true freshman walk-on. So it'll just be interesting to see if those 3 guys manage to get on the floor and how they look in some actual game action against a new opponent. Well, folks, we're going to close out the show switching gears a little bit. We're going to talk about a very tragic situation developing at South Florida, the passing of their head coach, Amir Abdur-Rahim. We're also going to play a clip from Randy Bennett at WCC Media Day talking about the additions of Oregon State and Washington State and his approach to non-conference scheduling. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. Locked On Zags fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started right now with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you make your first $5 bet. Right now, the Zags, they remain plus 2,000 to win that national championship. If you're feeling like this is the year and you haven't done it yet, head to FanDuel, put $5 down. If you win, you get some big money and the Zags win a championship. That's a great day. And if you don't win, you still get those $200 in bonus bets. Again, that is guaranteed. So check it out, FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And before we play a short clip from Randy Bennett from the WCC Media Days, where we talked to him about Oregon State and Washington State joining the league, and we also spoke to him about his non-conference schedule this year and just his approach to non-conference scheduling. It's a very great conversation, good clip there, but I did want to mention this. In case you hadn't seen this, this happened about an hour, was reported about an hour or two before I'm hitting record here on Thursday evening. Amir Abdur-Rahim, the 43-year-old head coach of the South Florida Bulls, passed away on Thursday morning. He is the brother of Khalif Battle, which is a name that'll be familiar to many of you who followed the NBA closely. He played for the Atlanta Hawks, played for the Memphis Grizzlies or Vancouver Grizzlies. He played for the Blazers briefly as well. That was kind of when I followed his career closely. But Amir was the head coach at Kennesaw State, nearly took them to an upset win over Xavier a few years ago in the NCAA tournament. He then took over at South Florida last year and immediately led the Bulls to a 25-8 record. But it's about more than that, obviously. I mean, 43 years old, passed away. It sounds like it was complications from a surgery. There's not a lot of detail at this point that I have seen. South Florida, a solid basketball program, and was really on the up and up with Coach Abdur-Rahim. But so I followed him fairly closely from the Locked On College Basketball podcast. We talked about him quite a bit on the show when he got hired by South Florida and when that team ended up winning the regular season in the American Athletic Conference. And one thing that really stood out to me is just how fun he seemed. It seemed like players really enjoyed playing for him. There's a great moment where he was really this was back when he was at Kennesaw State and they had a really good game. I think they won their conference tournament to get into the big dance, and he was cheering along with the crowd. And there's a video that I saw posted that just warms your heart. It's just the kind of fun things that we love about college basketball. And 43 is too young for anybody. And to lose somebody who was, I mean, he was an up and comer in the college basketball space, but that's not really what matters. You know, I mean, it's a part of his story, but it's sad anytime somebody like this passes away so suddenly and unexpectedly at this age. So big loss for college basketball and just an unfortunate kind of way to end the off season here before we get into the start of the real games for college basketball coming up. With all that said, I know that's a tough transition here. We are going to play this clip here. 3 minutes, Randy Bennett talking about some fun stuff at the WCC Media Days. Check it out.
2 new teams joining the WCC this year, Oregon State, Washington State. Obviously, Washington State program that made the tournament last year. A very new roster, new coach, but still a program that's had some success. Oregon State was in the Final Four a few years back. What does it mean for this conference to have these 2 teams in the league and for you and your program to get a chance to compete against them this upcoming season?
Yeah, it's they'll be good. They'll be good. They were playing that pack. They have good teams in the pack. They have, they have money because they're from the football school. So they're the last two teams for the pack. So they'll have, you need money. You need money for NIL. You need money for resources, the whole deal. So they'll have that. And I don't know if everybody knows that, but that's an advantage. And they played good teams. So it's going to help our league for these 2 years. I think it gives our league some depth. And in 2 years, there's 3 of them that are leaving. And we'll still have 10 good ones after that. But these guys, Washington State had a great year last year. They're really good. And then Oregon State, their final 8 in the country just 4 years ago, something like that.
Yeah,
so
not too long ago.
Yeah, they have, both those teams have some of that. They've gone through that experience. They know what it feels like to get to the tournament. Not that many teams can say that.
Wanted to ask quickly about non-conference scheduling, something that I've always been wanted to kind of learn more about from mid-major coaching perspective, because I think it's difficult we saw this with Gonzaga about a decade ago, where they really struggled to schedule a lot of Power 4, Power 5 teams, and I've really enjoyed the non-conference schedule that your squad has put together the last few years. A lot of really competitive teams and programs that you guys have been able to put to schedule. How difficult is it to get some of those marquee games, especially against power teams, or even against some of the better non-power programs like some of those Mountain West schools and other programs that you guys have played the last few years?
Well, obviously, we've been able to do it. Some of it's resources. You got to have some money for scheduling to get them. You can go on the road and play them, but there's nobody good doing that.
Yeah,
like go get bought, probably get beat, and that's not a good formula for being good and getting to the tournament. So we try, and it's pretty simple to me. Try and schedule the best teams you can, either neutral or home. Try and get the best ones. So don't try and get the 300s. Like, some people still do that. They hunt those guys. I don't want those guys because they drop your net. So we try and, we got Akron on there, and Towson State's our opener there. Towson's pretty good. Akron's really good. And others, we got Utah State. So some of our homes are that, and then any neutral we're playing, we want that to be a quad one.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I am so excited that the next time we have an episode of Locked On Zags, we will have a real basketball game to talk about against a real opponent again. I know it doesn't go in the record books, but it still counts. I'm so excited. We're going to talk the results of this USC scrimmage, what it means for Gonzaga. We'll also get ready for that Warner Pacific exhibition game on Wednesday next week. We got a couple more player preview episodes to do. And then suddenly we're there. November 4th, 8:30 p.m. Pacific time, Gonzaga Baylor, going to be an incredible basketball game at the Spokane Arena. I cannot wait to get a preview for that game going as well. Thanks again for listening, folks. Have a fantastic weekend. And now with an actual game coming up, go Zags.